Welcome to Under the Lens. Come and enjoy an extraordinary, raw, and unfiltered podcast that delivers debate, discussions, and interviews about film, pop culture, and everything in between. Here is your host, film critic and journalist, Byron Lafayette.
Greetings all and welcome to Under the Lens with Byron Lafayette. I am, of course, your host, Byron Lafayette, and today we're going to have a really fun and interesting conversation with a filmmaker about his latest short film that has come out and been making the festival circuits. It's a film titled August, and I am here with the director, Eli McGowan. Welcome, Eli, to the program.
Thanks for having me, Byron.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to chat with you about your film because as you know, you sent me the link, so I've seen it, and just like when I was watching it, I was just very impressed with all the qualities and the filmmaking and the script and the story and everything. And so I definitely like to get into just all the nuances that went into making it, and just like some of the background and everything. But before we jump into the actual film itself, what got you interested in like being a filmmaker, being a director, or a cinematographer?
Sure. No, there was the completely unoriginal moment, but there was a moment in my life for sure. And that was, I was like 5 or 6 years old, living on a military base in Alabama. And my dad borrowed from another soldier the VHS special editions of Star Wars. And the funny part about VHS is, of course, there's no special features. You start the movie, you play it through. But those special editions, a lot of people forget, they had like a 20-minute featurette before the movie would play, and it was a behind the scenes featurette.
I remember that.
So for 20 minutes before you could watch the movie, you were forced to watch, them talking about shooting in Tunisia, talking about applying Vaseline to the 35 millimeter film to create the special effect of the land speeder. All sorts of little things, little tidbits of movie magic, and that definitely sunk its claws into me. Started making short films with my eventually 7 younger siblings on our camcorder, shooting stills, 35 millimeter stills with my family's SLR, and I always wanted to do that. Got severely sidetracked. Ended up after undergrad going to law school for a year. I had always liked stuff related to that, and my mom and dad were hoping I would, make some money, do something more respectable than become a Hollywood, clown. So that lasted for 1 year. My daughter was born right at the end of my first year of law school, and that made me realize that it's actually possible I might have more time in this industry to spend with her and my family than I would in law. And right at that same time, my best friend died in a hiking accident, actually right in front of me. And that really changed a lot of things about how I approached lifespan and, the meaning of life and what I wanted to do with my life. But the main thing I took away from both of those events is it would be really sad if, even if I had success in law, if I looked back and I always wondered what would have happened if I had, just given film a shot. And I decided, fail or not, at least I'll have certainty. At least I'll be able to live with myself if I try and see where I end up. And so it's been a long and weird, tough journey, and a lot of low budget features, a lot of faith-based features, a lot of just complete shit show features, and some corporate work as well. I worked adjacent to politics because that's what my undergrad degree was in Washington, D.C. for several years. So all sorts of slimy characters. I did some work I wasn't super proud of in that time, but all along the goal was to work in film. And my wife and I came down to Georgia, got our MFAs the last couple years, and this film was the capstone to that. It's also a proof of concept for a feature film. And meanwhile, I'm occupied with some other documentary projects, and my day job is managing a grip and electric rental house. So we service a lot of TV shows and features here, but it's been a wild journey.
That's very cool, and it is very true, what you said, that it's like, it's, better to have tried and failed at something, than to have never tried at all.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I feel much more at peace now. I hope. I don't know. There's other days where you're like, well, health insurance is nice. Maybe if I was a lawyer, at least if I'm depressed, I can buy the right things or see whoever I need to see. But it depends on the day of the week. Today's a good day.
Oh no, definitely, because yeah, it can, I imagine, that there's some days that are better than others in the career. It's like, on my side, I'm working towards being, a writer, and stuff, and I want to, eventually publish like novels and everything. And when you're sending stuff in, submitting, either like novellas, poetry books, or whatever, it's like you're always getting rejected. And so it's like,
Yeah.
you're trying to figure out, okay, yeah, maybe the next one will be it, but
No, I feel bad for you guys. My wife is a writer. Her MFA was writing, and it's so funny as I'm applying to festivals and stuff like that. She's like, "You hear back? Like you they have to notify you. You get accepted. You only have to pay like $5 or there's a cash prize. You're like, it's so much worse for writers, and it seems like it's only getting worse with the development of technology and AI and everything. But
it's horrible. That's what I had a friend who posted online about the how this one I think it was Clark's, I think, a very famous science fiction magazine, and and they were like, oh, we're pausing all submissions while we figure out like how to track like AI submissions. And and I told my friend, I was like, oh man, I was like, it's already hard enough to get published, that now we're literally competing with like robots now.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, it's so fun. She's like, yeah, you can pay like $50 and submit to the New Yorker. And by the way, they haven't selected someone who's done a submission who didn't have an agent in 50 years or whatever. But you can pay them $50, and it's crazy because there's a lot of festivals out there, and it's still competitive, and it's a golden age for that. It might not last forever, but I'm glad that I'm around during this time, and people can still kind of get out there. I think we're equally scared about AI and what the future has, but yeah.
Yeah, it's very true, and I agree with you. I think that right now, festival wise, it's really really good for filmmakers. There's so many opportunities to be able to get your your work out there for audiences and judges to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I would imagine too, before we get to the to your actual film, what is your like your opinion, because obviously I think you're pretty much you're close in age to me. I'm 35.
Oh, nice.
And and it's the process of filming is so different, obviously, when we were growing up to people now. And what do you think about the whole process of how you had to have a dedicated type of camera, when we were younger, and it's like now, you have so much, power within just like, your cell phone to be able to obviously not make stuff maybe quite, to the level with other stuff, but you can actually, film, a reasonably decent looking,
Sure.
film on your phone. Like, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, and I am a tiny bit younger. I'm still in that denial age. I'm 29 and I'll be 30 this June, so I can pretend that I'm not middle aged for like a couple more months or whatever. But no, you're totally right. And so technology, it develops in good ways and bad ways. Obviously, AI is really scary because it has the potential to shut artists out of a living and further remove the means of making a living for themselves, the means of capital away from the artist's hands. And cell phones and stuff like that were the opposite. What we saw in the switch to digital and DSLRs and mirrorless and iPhones and everything that's come out of that, YouTube, is democratization. It's allowed people with true talent to stand out. And that's really good and really scary, because there's a lot of people, as you obviously know as a critic, there's a lot of people who are handed immense money and power and given opportunities that many of them deserve it, and some of them really don't deserve it, yet they're handed that because they're part of a system that originated out of the blue 100 years ago and is still trying to figure out its identity. Even TikTok and stuff like VR and XR, it kind of scares me because it's a little bit after my time, and people with talent stand out, but you have to work hard and show that talent to stand out. So it's as tough as it's ever been, but the good part is I think more people who have that talent are really being rewarded at every level, because you're right, anyone can go out there with an iPhone and shoot something and put it on the internet and get millions of people to see it, which is just something no one before maybe the 80s or 90s could have even imagined. So yeah.
No, it's absolutely true. And, as you were saying too, I think, talent obviously, rises to the top, because, you look at I think it was a couple of years ago, Zack Snyder filmed like a short film all on like an iPhone, and it looked amazing, of course, and stuff. And it's like, obviously anybody who picks up an iPhone, it's not going to look quite like that,
Yeah. And people overrate the whole camera thing. Like I remember being a gearhead when I was in high school and middle school, and like refreshing the page of the Canon website or the even the Panavision website, like just staring at this $100,000 camera, like, oh, if I only had this, I would be George Lucas, and not realizing like I didn't know anything about anything back then. There's so much that goes into the performance, the storytelling, the stuff like color and left to right motion and storytelling and all this theory and stuff. And the gear is so far down on the list, and of course I'm in a different spot in my career now, so now I sound like the people who said that back then. I was like, yeah, but you have a nice camera. But no, it's become so much more democratized. It's great, and the people with the knack for storytelling are really starting to stand out. There's some incredible 15, 16, 17-year-old filmmakers putting their stuff on TikTok. They have to like crop it down and like tell you to rotate your phone or whatever. But then millions of people are seeing it, and they're gathering a following, and some of them are even funding their films through TikTok. So it's been really cool to see what people are taking advantage of.
That's very true, and you mentioned obviously like knack for storytelling and stuff, and that kind of leads us right into the short film that you've just made, August. Where did the idea for this film come from? Like, how did it originally come about for you to decide to make it?
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to this story, and it's based on a short story written by my wife. She never got the short story published. That's the fate of writers. I think it's an incredible story. I think the story is better than the movie, and it was nominated by our school for the AWP awards and all sorts of stuff, but it's never been published anywhere. No one, who knows if anyone ever read it outside of our circle of friends. But she was inspired to write a story about a young boy who is shocked by the appearance of German P.O.W.s in his rural Georgia farming community. And that's based on the real fact that German P.O.W.s found their way to camps all across America, and many of them were used in agricultural work. And her family has a connection to that because in the 1970s, her dad was playing on their family farm that they've owned for 200 years there in Emmanuel County, Georgia. He was digging by a railroad track, and he just pulls out a German penny piece, a pfennig, and it has a swastika emblazoned on the back. And
Wow.
He knew that, there was either workers there or a cattle car. I mean, not a cattle. They moved them in nice Pullman cars, treated them very well overall. But he knew at some point a German prisoner had lost that coin right there on his family farm. And so she decided to write a story drawing on that, but also drawing on the rise of nationalism and xenophobia that we see in our society today, and kind of ask the question of what would that boy who has a very immature, very black and white way of viewing the world, what would he do if he was confronted with those POWs and confronted with his sister, the school teacher of the town, being in love with them, having a relationship with one of them, and stumbling across that. So there was that we were drawing on, and we were also drawing on other family stories that come into some of the other plot points. But yeah, it was, I thought, extremely original, and I had to pick a story to do for our next film. Our previous film, which we haven't completed, we moved ahead with August after we shot our previous one because it was my thesis. I had to graduate. We had to move ahead. We could only fund one movie at a time. Our previous one had been about the death of our friend who had died in that hiking accident. It was about grief, and it was about a park ranger up in the mountains, and that was super fun, and I really liked it at the time. I shouldn't have even done that, or should have done that as my thesis. Was 2 films during a 3-year degree is kind of crazy. And I was at a loss for what I was going to do next, so I was really happy that she was like, well, no one's publishing this short story. I'm not sure if anyone's ever going to see it. Do you want to take a hack at it? And I was like, yeah, please. So we co-wrote the screenplay, and we added a new beginning and ending that added a little bit of Hollywood to it, I think. And now it's off to festivals. We've heard back from one. We're going to hear back from another tomorrow, and another the day after that. And then we have about 30 more we're going to hear back over the course of the year. But that's our first round. None of those are those household name festivals. In general, you shouldn't apply to any of those until you get some laurels at some other ones, so that the big guys watch your film. So that's the goal. We'll see how it goes on this first round. If it goes well, then we can push it up to the big guys. But we're also moving ahead with the story for our next film, which we'll shoot in the fall or winter, and it's another dark Southern story, even shorter and punchier, hopefully. But yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, because I definitely I enjoy the like kind of the darker Southern stories, with novels and stuff like that. I really enjoy like my John Grisham and stuff like that. But
yeah, John Grisham's great. I loved reading A Time to Kill, and I loved watching the movie. Matthew McConaughey really shines in that movie. Yeah, I think it was one of his real first serious roles. That was in the midst of all those rom-coms he was doing.
It was.
But it really showed his chops that he would show later in True Detective and other stuff. But that genuine Southern flavor has been around since before movies were made. It was in Southern literature, which was a topic I looked at a little bit in my MFA thesis paper. But the idea that there's something inherently Southern in storytelling that has been influenced by the people and the place of the South, and which can be used, it can be abused, but there's a style we have in dealing with the problem of evil and dealing with sudden twists of fate, ironies, seemingly insane stuff happening very quickly that you see in Mark Twain, that you see in Flannery O'Connor, that you see in so many Southern authors, that can be used to speak really deeply to the human experience, because it doesn't always make sense. And that's something that I definitely walked away feeling after that tragedy back in 2016 in our previous film. The South is kind of a dangerous place. We have alligators, we have some real mean bastards, we have some crazy weather, we have, it's 110 degrees outside sometimes. And I think that wore off on Southern literature and films now set in the South, if they're a good adaptation, if they're, made by a Southerner, if they are genuine to it. I love Tim Burton's Big Fish, and I love the Coen Brothers, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And both of those have the same thing. There's just crazy shit happening, every moment.
That's true. Yeah, Oh Brother, Where Art, that was such a great movie. It's great music, but it's just like the storyline and just everything that happens is just it's so good. It feels like it's made up almost of like a series of vignettes almost.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
so great.
exactly.
Uh, no, it's true because I feel like one thing you do see a lot of in like Southern like style stories and films and stuff is that there's kind of that dark undercurrent underneath an idyllic or normal life and I think sometimes that speaks to people obviously because sometimes we don't always see the bad that's underneath the good. um and I feel like that's kind of a little bit of if I'm not wrong, a theme that you kind of visited a little bit in August, of this kind of like anger, mixed with grief that was going on with these characters. That August unfortunately kind of comes into the middle of kind of unbeknownst to himself.
Yeah, definitely. That yeah, Southern two-facedness that we're famous for is present there. I mean, you have that dinner scene early on where they're praying, they're kind of being hospitable in a way, but there's also this seething anger because they see the other. And film has its limits. It's super interesting. In the short story version, the last name Blun is a German name, um, and that's not really a super big part of the film. You only hear the name once in a different scene, but the idea behind some of our casting, August, the German POW, has slightly darker features. He might have been um, a conscript, maybe not. We don't know. But they looked like a lot of different people. And there's two sides of that. The two sides that are people don't have to look a certain way to be evil and do the bidding of the Nazi party. But there's also, you don't have to look a certain way to be treated right and treated like you are a human either. And the Blunds were all cast to have somewhat lighter features. They all have kind of a mix of light and blonde hair, blue eyes, because they came from the same place just a couple generations earlier. Maybe they changed their name after the First World War like a lot of people did. So there's some shame in there, which you just pointed out. That's dead accurate. Later on in the scene, where the kind of really angry patriarch father finally does find out from the son about what his daughter, the school teacher, has been up to. He is very ashamed, and he tells the mother, basically, they have to take action because of their reputation, because what'll happen when people find out, which is the heart of a lot of toxic nationalism. It's the idea that we have to keep up this facade of total devotion and unanimity.
That's very, very true. Because yeah, you do see that a lot with nationalism. When you carry it to its absolute nth degree. That yeah, it does get very. I think toxic is the perfect word for it. And I think that's very interesting because that is something I never thought of. With the film of that basically they are all from the same place generally, just generations removed. I think that's something very interesting that I didn't pick up on my first viewing.
Yeah, and there's some other nods to that too, because in the schoolroom scene where we film the teacher sister giving the German POWs English lessons, which was something that really happened. German POWs were given English lessons by local teachers sometimes in the local schools. Um, we have a big American flag on the wall behind her, and that was something that was written into the short story, and we took it from the short story to the screen. It's a super oversized American flag. You don't really notice it. It just feels appropriate in the film, but it's massive and it's there. And it was kind of like a propaganda piece to the soldiers that we were trying to indoctrinate away from within the camps. There were more radical SS elements sometimes, and sometimes POWs were actually assaulted or killed by those more radical elements. So we were trying to we would say deprogram, but maybe we were programming them. It's hard to tell which. Nobody's objective here. But we had that big banner on the wall behind her, and there's this nationalistic fervor that we definitely took part in. I mean, the fact that we elected a guy president 4 times in a row. He only served 3 terms, but 4 times in a row during that time period. And the fact that we had suspended so many liberties, that we had incarcerated people based on their race, those of Japanese descent. There's a lot of uncomfortable similarities that some of the defense attorneys at Nuremberg would reference and bring up to, maybe wrongly. As I think they were wrong, and we were right to convict them at Nuremberg. But they were still pointing out stuff that stood out. A really crazy tidbit that I just stumbled across during our research for this film is America had a couple all Jewish camps during World War II. And the reason was, like the Japanese internment, early on in World War II, we interned a lot of diplomatic families and German travelers, who were especially really wealthy ones. And it was somewhat discontinued later on, but we had a few little camps of German detainees. And in those camps, we were afraid of the Jewish population of those camps, which was somewhat significant because there's a large number among German immigrants at that time. We were afraid they would get targeted, so we segregated them out. But the result is just the mind-boggling, statement. Oh, America had camps of Jewish people during World War II. Like, that's so crazy to hear. And obviously the intent was not the same, but the effects of nationalism can be similar in ways that make us uncomfortable. And I think that's one of the main takeaways from the film.
Yeah, because it's very true, especially in World War II. I remember I watched, because I was a huge fan, growing up, of the golden age of Hollywood and everything. So I watched, pretty much everything there was to see, with the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and and I remember I think it was at like the 99-cent store, I think I found, where it was like this VHS collection of Frank Capra's Why We Fight. And absolutely magnificent series of films about World War II. Absolutely stone cold propaganda. Just wonderfully made, because Frank Capra was a great filmmaker, and he, and I remember, just like watching it, being like, you were like, oh my gosh, look at these monstrous, Germans, and monstrous Japanese, because it totally showcases, very much of like what you said of like the other,
yes.
And especially when it was like in the Pacific theater, just, showing the barbarity, nothing positive whatsoever, nothing about normal people. It was just like, oh, look at these monsters out here who we have to go stop. And it was,
and leaning into racial stereotypes, like the cartoons from that era, from Warner Brothers and from Disney, are super fun to watch. We had a collection of World War II cartoons we would watch from all the different studios, but they depict the Japanese in the same way that Disney would depict Native Americans and Warner Brothers would depict African Americans. And it was, just really horrible stuff. But at the same time, they felt like they had a national duty to, convince people that this was life or death, black or white. The problem is, and the message of our entire film is, nothing is ever completely black or white.
It's very, very true. Yeah, very, very, very rarely is there a situation like that where it's like complete good and evil, and even if you may have good and evil at the higher levels, when you get down, like obviously like with World War II, you have the evil Nazi government, the American government was, technically good, I guess you could say, when you compare it to the Nazi
Yeah.
government and stuff.
Oh, definitely. I have no qualms with
Mhm.
saying that.
But then, like you said, you go down when you start going down to like, the foot soldiers, the people here, and it's like, you had people stuck in horrible situations, and it wasn't quite as clear as those propaganda films would like to make it. And I think, your film kind of showcases that, when it shows like August, he's a good guy, from what we see in the movie. He's not like some SS, monstrous character who took part in genocide. He's just kind of like an everyday guy, everyday POW.
And that's super interesting that you conclude that, because we don't really know anything about
Exactly.
him at all.
Mhm.
And one of my professors back when we were first
Mhm.
over reviewing the script
Mhm.
before we shot, he was like, maybe you need to, make him a little bit bad in some ways,
Mhm.
so people don't think that you're, saying that there can be a good Nazi. And I was, well, we don't know if he's a Nazi or not. He could have
Mhm.
been conscripted, but
Mhm.
we did try to do that a little bit. It
Mhm.
didn't come across so much, but in the scene where he's um, at the azalea bush with Meredith, the older
Mhm.
sister, we tried to show him like being a little bit forward, a little bit
Mhm.
pushy. We don't know if he is a truly romantic. It's a
Mhm.
10-minute film. We don't have
Mhm.
time to see the development of a relationship that would last a lifetime. My wife is convinced he is the real romantic. She is
Mhm.
absolutely in love with the character that she wrote. Um, and for me, it doesn't matter,
Mhm.
because prisoners shouldn't be lynched, which is of course what
Mhm.
ends up happening in the film. So um, it's an interesting subject, and one that I feel like it was easier to approach because I had grown up. I lived 4 years in Germany. I
Mhm.
toured a lot of the battlefields. I heard about some of the atrocities that happened on both sides in every war.
Mhm.
There's individuals, like you said, on the lower end. People don't really know why they're fighting, and it gets into black and white very quickly for them. And then you also see that extrapolated out by their governments. I mean, we see
Mhm.
that today, um, with the internet and with propaganda, how it is today, with bots and trolls and stuff. You can have something truly awful happen in a place like Ukraine, where they're clearly the innocent party. They've been invaded, but a soldier might kill someone who they shouldn't, like a
Mhm.
prisoner of war. It happens in every war, but all of a sudden it's in high def. It's spread around the world. It can be used by regimes that have no respect for human rights themselves, but are really good at pushing a narrative. And so it gets so muddled. It's always so gray, and that's
Mhm.
just really unfortunate. The only antidote is to humanize as many people as possible.
No, it is absolutely true, and I think it's especially with World War II, as we, had like more stories from families coming out and everything, we kind of saw some of that hardship, with certain people of having to, make moral decisions, because, it's, like you said, sometimes you might have been conscripted into the Nazi army, and you were automatically a member of the Nazi party if you were basically, if you were a member of society, and then it's like, well, if you were in the army, might have been faced with certain choices, if you were, sent on certain missions to kill certain people, um,
And even that is a choice. It's not to
exactly.
remove
Hmm.
the agency that someone
Hmm.
like August would have
Hmm.
had. One of my favorite films from the last 5 years was Terrence Malick's uh, A Hidden Life.
Yes.
I
Hmm.
had the privilege of watching that at the SCAD Savannah Film Festival, which is our
Hmm.
yearly festival here. It was one of the features they were showcasing there. It's a really great festival here if you ever get a chance to attend. We've had Ryan Johnson, Malik, some other people come,
Wow. Hmm.
but we watched that, and I was just weeping at the choice that this nobody made to give up living in one of the most idyllic, beautiful places on earth, with a family that loved him, with a farm that met all his needs, with the community, that he had grown up with, choosing to throw it all away and say that he couldn't work as a conscript. He probably wasn't even going to be sent to the front, but he could not support the Third Reich. And so there is agency in those choices. Now, for him, that was a death sentence. And I actually got the privilege of asking a question of the cast at that festival screening. So I got to talk to Valerie Pashner, who played the wife of the gentleman in that film, the character in that film, who was a real person, of course. He was venerated as a saint by the Roman Catholic Church. But I asked her what made her think, or did she think, that choice was worth it, that one individual really had to give up everything in his life at that time. And if other people had, obviously, it could have ended sooner, but wasn't it so unfair that one farmer just ended his life over what was happening around him? And she's German, so there was a little bit, it wasn't the best English in her reply, but the gist of her reply was, you don't have to be a big person to make a difference, and good and evil is something we all deal with every day. And I thought it was very interesting that she, who obviously is probably somewhat privileged, she's a famous actress, and she was given an award at our festival, that she could see that it wasn't in vain that this insignificant guy, and in the film, one of the Nazi officials, tells him, he said, you are going to be forgotten tomorrow. That he hasn't been forgotten. He's venerated around the world as a saint, and the Nazi regime has fallen and stuff, but it's tough. Not many people make that decision. That's why we remember him. It's the few, and it's hard to know at the time, because at the time that he did that, he didn't even know about the death camps. He didn't know about any of that. That was completely, hidden from him.
Very much
so. How do we know in our time and place what hills are worth dying on? It can be a very scary thing once you start to think about it.
No, yeah, because that's very true. I think of, I think it was relatively recently. I want to say in the last 5 or 10 years or so, and it was some woman who was a secretary at one of the death camps. She was like the secretary to the commandant or something like that, and she was. I believe they were going to put her on trial, I believe, in Germany, and and her defense basically was like, well, I didn't participate in anything, all I did was manage the paperwork, for everything. And they, and they basically kind of said, well, they said, yes, you didn't actually kill anybody. You didn't actually do anything like that. But they said, you had full knowledge of what was going on in this camp. You had full knowledge of everything, and you chose to be one of the cogs that helped move it along more swiftly.
And that's the really scary part, because there were a lot of cogs then, and there's a lot of cogs now for a lot of horrible things. Obviously, the things might not be as horrible, but our willingness to be a cog is probably somewhat equal.
No, absolutely. Yeah. And, I think that it's very, very true, and that, goes back to what you were saying of how, everybody, makes a choice, of how involved they're going to be, or if they're going to be involved, or they justify it, or, and like you said, with humans, it's so easy to kind of go along with the crowd. There was a, psychological study that was done years ago. I remember I studied it in school, and it was a terrifying psychological study of where they put, and this was kind of back before there was all of the psychological protections that are put in now with like the ethics boards and everything. But it was, in short, it was basically they put people in these rooms, and they basically said, if you press a button, it's going to cause some pain for someone in the other room. Now, of course, the button wasn't connected to anything, but the people didn't know that. And so they were telling them, basically, they put an authority figure in and said, push the button, and they tested basically with people, okay, you push the button, this person will feel a prick or something like that. And they got all the way up to basically where they would play a recording of someone screaming in the other room, like something was happening. And people would still keep pressing the button because they felt an authority figure was telling them to do it. And it was a terrifying result of like how easy it is for humans to go along with stuff.
Yeah, it's always been terrifying, and I stumbled across that exact study fairly recently in my research. There were two people who refused from the get-go, and their backgrounds were really interesting. One man was a Presbyterian minister.
Interesting.
And the other was a woman whose mother was a Holocaust survivor. And they, from the first level, refused. Other people refused later on, but from the very beginning, those two were the only two that refused to press the button at the mildest level. But those cogs are people without a personal stake. It becomes more believable that someone like Mr. Blonde, the father in our film, would do something so homicidal when there's a personal stake. So not only was he afraid of his family's reputation and his daughter's chastity, and that's where our film suddenly, is connected to other topics of a culture of honor and of patriarchy. But we also portray, just for a minute, as his son is telling him the news, that he's received this telegram. And you can barely read it. It's technically on screen long enough to read it. It's not super important. But the text, is telling him that his son is missing or dead. And it's from the War Department. My wife actually made the prop herself with her typewriter and using coffee to age the paper and stuff. But that was a nod to something from my family side, which was my great uncle died in the Battle of the Bulge. He had landed on Utah Beach and fought his way across the continent with his chemical mortar battalion. But on the first night of the Battle of the Bulge, the little town they were in, Sadzo, was overrun by German tanks, and he was killed. But his picture is who we depict as the older brother, Jesse, which was his name, who's off in Europe in our film. And then the dad has been informed of this death right before he decides to, take this action. That was a late addition to the script. Originally, we weren't going to inform him. We were just going to show a folded flag under his picture in the 10 years later that we start the film out on. We start the film with Irene visiting for the very first time in 10 years. One of her parents, the last living parent, has died. She's wearing funeral attire. Her brother is drunk at the kitchen table, and she goes in to speak to him for the first time in 10 years. But we ended up not using that folded flag at all. And in just a couple days before shooting, we came up with the idea of putting that telegram in there as a final motivation towards homicide. Because again, some people were like, well, it doesn't make any sense that he would kill him, which is, it's funny because those people were also not from the South necessarily. And I love Ricky Smiley, our actor who plays Mr. Blonde, because he wasn't really acting all that much. He plays that character very well because he is from just a few dozen miles away, and he knew the type of man that character would be. But what made us put that scene in the film with the telegram was after my grandfather read our script, he told me a story that he had never told me before. In the whole process of developing the film and writing the script and stuff, we, are a couple of weeks away from filming this film about POWs. And he's like, oh, I remember POWs. I saw POWs. And you're like, Grandpa, what are you talking about? This is the grandfather that I traveled from Utah Beach to the place in the middle of the Black Forest where my great uncle died with. I saw him cry there and everything. And he had never told me this story, but he said that, there were agricultural POWs there where he grew up in coastal North Carolina, just like my wife's family was nearby in middle Georgia. But he said after his parents had been notified by the War Department that their son was missing, and then a few weeks later that he was killed, they, were tobacco farmers, and they would still have to bring their donkey cart into the coastal warehouse filled with tobacco for processing. And a lot of those POWs worked in the coastal warehouses, loading ships and moving tobacco. And Grandpa said his father would sit there and stare at them. And Grandpa was maybe 7, 8 years old. And he would watch his father just get really irrationally angry at these guys and talk about how lazy they were, how they were laughing and smiling and being treated so well, knowing that his son was buried in a box in the cold ground of Europe, an ocean away. And how he said it made him, feel like he wanted to kill somebody. And hearing that just 4 or 5 days before we shot our film was incredible. I was like, oh, okay, so this really could have happened. It's a fictitious story, but it's a story that now I really know could have happened given the right circumstances. If his daughter had been involved with a guy like this, like, of course, what else would happen here in the South? So it's really interesting to be able to blend different problem subjects, different themes, and hope. Not everyone finds it believable. Some people, hate it. Everyone has different reactions to art. But I like what we came up with there. And it's rooted in some other things as well. My wife's family has some family records about some violence and a lynching, about an alleged rape, from a century or more ago.
Wow.
And it was interesting. This one record in the family history, the woman testified that she was raped by an African American man, and he had been lynched by the local people there in Emmanuel County. But I believe it was a few years later she ended up dying herself at her husband's hand. She was killed by her husband, and it was very interesting. It made us wonder, whether or not that was a rape. It's just a little line in a ledger book of, the census and the family records, and who knows if that happened or not. But there's little tidbits you can draw from different parts of history, and especially if it's your own history, to make a story that feels real to you.
Absolutely, yeah. Because when I was watching it, I definitely was, able to feel, the emotion, coming through, and like kind of the real life aspect of it. And it was, and also, we talked about, briefly, kind of the filmmaking quality, that it was very well made, because a lot of times, with short films or lower budget films, whatever, you're obviously working with limitations,
Huge limitations.
What were some of the limitations you encountered making this?
Sure. Well, it took us like almost 2 years total in process, and it's supposed to take you 3 academic quarters, which are all in 1 year at my school, the way it's supposed to progress. But the way the pandemic had happened, there were rules about shooting. Like you could have no more than 10 people on set, including talent. Well, we had a cast of like 8 or 9, not counting POW extras and other extras and stuff. So it was just impossible. So we just delayed shooting like quarter after quarter after quarter. My professors were like, "Are you going to graduate sometime soon?" The people at the equipment checkout cage, they were like, "Do you still go here?" And I hadn't even shot my thesis yet because I knew I wanted to do this film. Mm-hmm. Once I saw it, once my wife gave it to me, I couldn't just give this up and do something else. So we waited and we waited. And eventually they approved an exemption. We filed with them like a special safety plan. We'd filed with them proposing what exactly we were going to do. We kind of thought they were going to deny it and we were going to shoot it anyway, just not as my thesis. And we were kind of irritated that they approved it right at the last minute, because it was even more stringent. And our plan involved daily testing of all cast and crew. That cost us an extra $3,000 just for daily COVID testing.
Wow.
And 5-6 weeks later, when it entered the next quarter, the spring 2022 quarter, all those restrictions were gone. So it was just, money vaporized. But we were safe about it. The pandemic was still happening, and we were just glad to be able to shoot, because of planning it as not going to be a academic film. We didn't end up using any equipment from the school. So I had reached out to contacts in Atlanta and other places and arranged all the equipment rentals so that we could move ahead as if it wasn't going to be a school film. So that was extra, money and time and effort. But we still wanted to meet the safety requirements of the school in case it could be a thesis film. So we had, an approved armorer on set. We had an intimacy coordinator. We had a stunt person we flew in from Chicago. We had a rattlesnake wrangler with our real rattlesnake who came to set. Like, it felt very not student filmy to some people. I mean, I thought it felt very much like a student film to me, but luckily many of the people we had on set were people we had met not through school. Out of our 30 cast and crew, I think I had 4 or 5 classmates there. But most of them were people I had met working on other feature films. Some of them like low budget faith-based feature films, other ones commercials, other ones, other things. So it was an interesting game of just kidnapping people we thought would work well and dragging them to the middle of nowhere. And between our previous film, which had shot in the mountains of Tennessee, this one, which shot in February in like the Georgia plains, and then going out for my documentary on the Oregon coast, a couple of my go-to crew people are starting to joke that I like to drag them places where they're going to be cold and wet and not have cell service. But no, we shot in 4 days, and that was another huge limitation. We had to hand pick our interiors and our exteriors because there wasn't one farm where we could have such good interior and exterior shooting. So most of our exteriors were on one farm, and that farm was a gift in a way, because we came to find out that farm had hosted POW labor on it in the 40s. So that was
history.
Yeah, it was really cool to be able to have our POW extras stand there in a field that had been worked by POWs, and to roll our borrowed Jeep Willis onto that field. That was another crazy thing, because we found that Jeep like 2 days before we were shooting. We had searched everywhere. I had posted in Facebook group for Jeep Willys owners everywhere, like no luck. But my friend was walking through downtown Savannah and he saw one parked in someone's driveway, and he just called me and he was like, "Hey, this guy has a World War II Jeep." And we drove over there. We knocked on his door. He knew some people we knew. We signed a contract. We didn't even pay him anything. And he'd let the guy who was bringing our sedan plop it on his trailer and bring it 2 hours away with people he didn't even know. So happy he got his Jeep back. Maybe I should have kept it. I don't know. So yeah, it was a lot of crazy stuff that came together real fast. I was very proud of our AD team and our unit production managers. One of our unit production managers works in LA full time, but they did a good job of scheduling, of providing food and housing. We had a really nice hotel accommodations for our cast, many of whom were flown in from as far away as LA, Chicago, Baltimore. The guy we flew in from Baltimore, his only scene was cut out of the film. He's not even in the film. He's credited though. He was Rufus, the younger African-American friend of Henry, the main character boy. It was his father in the film. His scene was cut, and we felt bad that some of Rufus's scenes were cut as well. Because with festivals, you want to get it down to 10 minutes. You want it to be competitive for programmers. we thought it was much more punchy without as many side plots going on. You can't really have side plots at all in a short film, and we come dangerously close to that already. So some of his scenes were cut, and that was sad in a way because we didn't want him to be a token African American character, and he's not, because he's based on a real life person with the same name, Rufus Cross, who had provided my wife's family there in Emmanuel County with food and the ability to survive during the Great Depression. He rescued them. So we had designed a whole character based off of them, and the Blunds were in a similar situation, and it was explicit. And then those scenes got cut, and now it's, just an homage. But he is a character who will be fleshed out much more deeply if we get to do a feature version. But somehow all that came together. 4 days of shooting. We stayed on schedule, 12-hour days, 12-hour turnarounds. We shot our 4 days. We did 1 day of special effects pickups a few months later where we, burned our mannequin with diesel fuel and threw our brick through sugar glass and did a couple other little, trick shots and things. And then really appreciate I did a first draft edit, but I had a good friend who's a VFX and film guru. He's doing a XR short film that got a lot of praise on Indiegogo and other places right now. He's really great. Porter Justice. He came in and sharpened up the cut. We had an amazing sound team. Talitha Ambrush and Andrzej Lazaruk, who is Polish, I believe, but they did incredible sound work. We had generator noise and other stuff in our sound that they just completely eliminated. But our location sound guy was pretty good too. He's gone union since then. He's worked on Fear the Walking Dead since then.
Wow.
Great guy, Levi Carter. So super happy with all the post people. Our colorist, Camilo Gutierrez, he asked me what the inspiration for the color should be, and I told him, "Oh brother, where art thou?" And I came back and everything was yellow, and I was like, "What did you do?" And he was like, "You told me, oh brother, where art thou?" I was like, "Yeah, I forgot, oh brother, where art thou? Look, that yellow." But we worked it out. That's the problem if you've been taking your time and editing it for like 9 months, like I was, is you grow addicted to the original image, ungraded image, corrected but ungraded image. And it had grown on me too much, but everyone loves the color, and he did a great job bringing out that southern mood. And then Abigail Western, our composer, she's been delighted with the nomination she just got in our first little festival monthly competition. We'll find out in a few days if we made the annual festival in LA, but she was great. We had requested that she include the Goodnight Irene cover in the end credits. We really like that song because it's a reference to the character Irene. It's in the short story as well. It's from the South, and it is just kind of a bittersweet token of the romance that August and Irene had. And then she used our actress who played Irene to do the vocals in that credits song cover. And that was really exciting. Of course, it helped that song, nobody knows its origins, and it's over 100 years old. So it's well into the public domain, which can always help a struggling grad student who's already spent $30,000 on his movie so far. So we've rolled across that finish line right at the last moment. And now we're excited to see how people react to it.
It is very exciting, man. And I definitely, I wish you all the best when it comes to the festivals. I thought it was great. I really enjoyed watching. I've seen a lot of short films, over my time, and a lot of feature films. And this definitely, I felt like this was definitely near the top for short films that I've seen, just quality wise, and the story resonated with me, and and just like when I was watching it, I felt like it was the filmmaking was feature quality worthy, I thought. and I was very, very impressed with that. Um, so I hope everything goes well with those festivals. I hope you bring back a lot of awards.
Yeah, thank you. We definitely would love to come back to Emmanuel County and do the feature version of this story. My wife is about 60, 70 pages into that, and we're working it, but there's just so much more of this world to show. There's the entire struggle in the camps, the different power dynamics between the guards, the hardcore ideologue SS guys, the normal conscripts and people who just want to get back to their families. There's Rufus's family, this black family in a mostly white farming community before desegregation, and the fact that they're mildly successful. The Blunds as a family, how did Mr. Blund get to be the way he is? What made Irene different? Why is she a school teacher? Why does she want to go out and see more of the world? How does she ultimately escape, and how does she escape unscathed? Certainly her father would not have just let her get away with her transgression of the expectation there as well. So there's a lot more to tell in a 90-minute version of what we tried to tell in 10 minutes. And we'll definitely enjoy coming back to that if given the chance. But thank you for that's super high praise. That's crazy high praise. We'll see if the festival programmers feel the same way soon enough.
Oh, I definitely, I hope they do. I would love to see a feature length version of the story. Like you said, I think there's a lot more to explore in the world. Like you said, you get teases of the world building, and everything going on. I would love to be able to spend some more time there.
Yeah, I'm so excited for the future of historical films in particular. They used to be paint by numbers, history or paint by numbers propaganda, and they were all just kind of boring and stuff. You'd go to the library and have this massive selection of history films that felt like the ones they showed in school, especially textbook stuff that wasn't really story. It was mostly history. But people like Robert Eggers and streaming has really allowed this stylized, super cinematic vision of history to come and look under a microscope, under a magnifying glass at all these different parts of history. And ours isn't super stylized. Actually, we leaned into a 1940s or 50s style of like slow dolly moves and more objective framing and stuff like that. But it's still just super exciting. All the different little parts of history. That's where streaming comes in. People who are interested in their area, people who are interested in these niche topics. Streaming is leaning into exploring niche topics, and with doing my documentary and other stuff, that's very exciting too. Because if a big enough handful of people want to explore a small little corner of Georgia or coastal Oregon, then that story can get out there. So I'm super excited for whatever comes next, and I'm really glad that you were able to have me here, and can't wait to see what comes down the pipe.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Thank you for taking the time, to discuss your film, and just kind of, the way it was made and the history behind it. I think, especially with any type of film, whenever there's real life inspiration, when it comes to, like families or, just the geographical, histories, it makes it come alive, I think, a lot more. So I appreciate you sharing all of that with me.
Yeah, it's the truest definition of not based on a true story. Absolutely not, but inspired by it is deeply inspired by the place we come from and the families that we come out of. So again, thank you for having me, and that's all I have.
Oh man, how are people able to find your work, or like do you have anywhere that you like post your work, or on social media, or is there a way for people to eventually see your short film August online, or how would they go about that?
Yeah, we're currently in the middle of our festival run, so it's not available publicly until that run completes. When that run completes is also hard to predict, because if we're lucky, it'll go on for a long time, into next year maybe. If not, maybe it'll be available sooner. But they're welcome to follow me on Instagram or Twitter, or I'm a old guy who likes LinkedIn sometimes. I post there pretty regularly too, but I'll make sure it's updated. And I have a YouTube channel with some old stuff on it. But no, we can't wait until August comes out. But hopefully not too quickly.
Yeah, hopefully it has a very very long and successful run. So this is one of those situations where you want it to be delayed as long as possible.
Yes, but Instagram, Twitter, TikTok. Sometimes I do TikToks about filmmaking. It's at Eli McGowan at all of those places. ELIMCGOAN,
Oh man. Well, like I said, I appreciate you coming on the program, and anytime you have a new project, in the pipeline or anything like that, you're always welcome to come back on and chat with me about it.
It's a dangerous offer. We'll take you up on that. But yeah, thank you.
Oh man, thank you, Eli.